Hey everybody, Jake here with TrendSpider to go over the weekend video update into the second half of April. And before I get started into some of these broad market charts, crypto, and some individual names, just wanted to mention we do have a 35% sale going on for the Easter holiday weekend. You can use the coupon code EGG, EGG35. For 35% off any plan for up to 12 months. So just wanted to mention that before we jump in. And actually going to try to do a pretty condensed video. We'll see how good I am at that. But overall, just a pretty ugly week in the markets. And really, for the S&P 500, as you can see here, just for about 4 days, we did really nothing. So a pretty anticlimactic week, to say the least. But one thing I will mention here on SPY, we did hold that February low VWAP. And one thing that's a little iffy here is the fact that we did break down through this point of control volume node, which is part of the anchored volume by price from the COVID low. So all in all, not a pretty weekly candle, pretty ugly. And then on the daily side of things, just a lot of chop, really pretty much after the gap down on Tuesday. We didn't really make much progress at all. Moving into the Qs, pretty much a similar vibe that we're getting in the Qs. One thing that I have here is just this inverse head and shoulders that could potentially play out, but one thing that makes me a little nervous about this is just how obvious it is. So this inverse head and shoulder, this left shoulder goes all the way down to around 334.50. So technically, maybe we could move down a little further before this invalidates, but we are getting pretty close to this invalidating. And same thing on the weekly chart for the Qs. We moved right down to this next volume node after really moving down quickly through this volume gap. So not a lot of liquidity here, and that's why the price was able to move up and then both down through this area very quickly after being rejected at this break-even supply zone for the last 2 weeks. So we got rejected last week, and then we were rejected the week before that, and now we're just kind of really moving down quickly through that volume gap to this next volume node highlighted in green. Moving on to IWM, if I can spell IWM. Definitely a greener and better looking candle than SPY and the Qs, but all in all, we do have this COVID low VWAP and the all-time high VWAP here, pretty much creating this VWAP pinch. So price action's definitely starting to trade within a pretty tight range, and that COVID low VWAP is around 188. So if we have a pretty weak week next week, then we will be looking at possibly that 188 below, which is not only the COVID low anchored VWAP, but it is just these previous lows, so we can use price action and the VWAP. The thing is, this price action is essentially formed by that COVID low VWAP. So price respected this area, then we bounced, but you can see here as we flatten out on that COVID low VWAP, it's pretty much right in line with that 188 area. The VWAP is almost flat now, so 188 is definitely a level that you'd want to see hold on the long side. Now, on the daily, we do have this huge bear flag forming. We definitely have a little room with margin of error here before we fully break down, but all in all, not an incredibly good look going into the week ahead with this type of formation on the daily chart. And going into Bitcoin really has been our risk on, risk off sentiment indicator for some time now. And once again, it did exactly what it was supposed to do, really starting from last week. So we saw Bitcoin really starting to tank, interestingly enough, during the Bitcoin conference, and really not a lot of improvement over the last couple days. So what we really did here was we just moved straight down through this volume gap highlighted in orange, and we moved right down to this next volume shelf below. So remember, these are participants that pretty much got back to break even after being up a decent amount when we hit the high 47s, 48K area. So we're back down to this area. You can see price is really respecting this zone over the last several days. And I would definitely want to see, let's say, the 38K area hold, which is the bottom of this shelf. And if not, then we could definitely be retesting those previous lows. And you could even see here, you kind of have a bear flag forming on Bitcoin as well. So if we just kind of create this channel here, you can see we're definitely forming a bear flag across multiple facets of the market, including crypto here. And if you look on the weekly chart, the COVID low VWAP zone goes all the way down to around 32.5, all the way up to around 36. So you do have a pretty big area below that the price action can get to before we really start to really change any status quo here. And what I mean by that is you can see the price action has respected this area now multiple times over the last really year or so. So if we do move back down to this area, it's kind of right back to where we started. But if we break down through, let's say, that 32.5, 32.4 area on the weekly chart, that's when things start getting a little sketchy. Going into Ethereum, not much difference here. One thing I will point out is we have more or less of a symmetrical triangle forming here on the daily chart. And you can see here that if we break down below this green support zone, let's call it around 2,800, then things definitely could get a little iffy here as well. If you anchor the VWAP from this low back in January, that is right in line with this support zone as well, and that's right around 28.65, 28.75, give or take $10 or so. So for now, we're kind of holding within this pattern. If we break to the upside or downside, that's when you really would probably want to take action. Trying to trade within this this apex would probably get you chopped up a little bit with price action, trying to figure out which way it wants to go. Now, on the weekly side of things, you'll see here that if you look at the weekly chart, we have this previous resistance that's been tested quite a few times. So you can see here, here's the initial start, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we pretty much are just kind of retesting that area after breaking out. So if we can hold above this previous resistance zone, maybe this is just an SR flip, and we'll just have to see how that plays out. And I think the direction of the breakout, whether that's to the upside or the downside of this symmetrical triangle, is probably going to put in a short to medium term trend for Ethereum and probably the rest of crypto, as crypto generally moves together. Now let's look at some individual names, starting with Apple. You can see here Apple had that just massive straight move to the upside, and now we're kind of just moving almost straight to the downside, give or take a few big moves to the upside. But each one of these big moves to the upside has been met with a strong candle, and Thursday's candle not only is an outside bar, but a fully engulfing bar of the previous day on Wednesday. So, you could call this maybe a bull flag if you want, but all in all, it's not looking incredibly strong, especially considering we broke Monday's low. So all in all, not a great look here. And I think I even mentioned in the SPY candles that we maybe gapped down on Tuesday, but that was actually from Monday because we do not have trading on Friday. So that was me miscounting. So sorry about that. If you look at Apple, it looks pretty similar to Ethereum in that sense that we did break out of this downward sloping resistance zone. You can see that we're retesting it here, potentially as support, but you can never call any level support or resistance until it proves itself. And so in that case, we're kind of trading right at the zone. We'll just have to see what happens going into next week. But if you look at the daily chart, you can see that we are below the swing low VWAP from March 14th. So all in all, some pretty weak price action going into next week. Next one is Tesla. Tesla is also kind of starting to break below that March 14th VWAP. So you can see here that we did close below it on Thursday. And you can see here on the longer term side of things, looking at the weekly chart, we have this resistance that really acted as perfect resistance. Last week got rejected hard there. Kind of a weird weekly candle here. But one area I'd watch below if we do continue down next week is this previous gap zone. So notice that it did act as support back in December. And then once we broke down through it, it acted as resistance multiple weeks in a row before we finally broke through it back in mid to late March. So your resistance zone above in the 1100 to 1150 area above, and then below, let's call it 910 all the way up to around 940 would be a zone to watch below. And you never want to look at price action in exact price or price levels. You want to look at zones because that's really how price does act. And if something does touch something to the exact penny, it's generally just a coincidence. AMD, probably one of the uglier charts out there right now. After what looked like a potentially strong month into April, turned into just a brutal sell-off. So you can see here that we had this descending triangle. We broke down, tried to retest it earlier in the week, and then we actually broke the previous days, 2 days low here. So right around 95. Once we broke through 95 and had a strong close below it, not an incredibly strong chart going into the week ahead, at least for bulls. This looks like a pretty strong chart for bears. And if you're playing the short side, this may be a really strong setup for you. One thing to keep in mind on the bear side of things, we are nearing that COVID low VWAP here. So we have tested it a couple times right on the money, and then other times kind of around it. So you can see here back in July of 2020, you can see here back in May of 2021, we didn't get exactly down to it, but we bounced within $1 or $2 from it. And now we literally closed almost right at it on Thursday. So all in all, this level definitely needs to hold, maybe give or take a couple bucks, since we did technically break down in June of 2020 and reversed and continued to make new highs, but definitely not an incredibly strong chart. You can see this previous resistance that acted as support a couple different times after the July breakout did get broken down through and closed through on the weekly. So all in all, a very ugly chart going into next week. Maybe we can get some type of bottoming candle next week, but for now, not looking incredibly good. Now, let's look at one that actually looks decent, if we want to call it that, on the weekly chart. But on the daily chart, you can see here CRWD, we've got a very defined ascending wedge here, so we are getting close to the apex. Sometimes these can break to the upside, but a lot of the time people look at this as more of a bearish setup. But one thing I would argue here is the fact that we do have a pretty strong weekly candle. If you anchor the volume by price from the October high, and just move this all the way to the October high, you'll see we've kind of been stair-stepping up this volume shelf. So notice here, this volume price is kind of just walking up it, and now we have a pretty strong candle here with a break of the previous week's highs. And then I'm just curious what the raindrop looks like here. A decent amount of volume at the top of the range for the week too. So you've definitely got some conviction by buyers here. One thing I like to do is sometimes just draw a resistance line here of the previous highs. And you can see there's actually a decent amount of volume above that area. So this one is actually looking pretty strong, especially considering the weakness across the broad markets this past week. PLTR is the last one we're going to look at. Looks very similar to the SPY chart, at least on the daily, where we are kind of trading right at this February low VWAP. Technically, we had a higher low on Thursday, so we didn't break down, but we're definitely not looking incredibly good going into the week ahead. And then if you look at the weekly chart here, measuring the volume by price from the September highs, this area has now become a supply zone. So before, we actually had a pretty strong base. Price dropped right back through it after hitting almost $15 last week, and now we're starting to break down once again. We're below the point of control. So all in all, some pretty weak price action. And you almost actually had a blue raindrop form here on this current week's candle. Barely missed it, but all in all, just not healthy price action. One thing I will mention on the bull side, if we do get some momentum to the upside, we do have a gap above around 1380 that would need to fill. And on the bear side, you do have a gap below around 1085. So you can always just turn on the gap snake. So if you haven't used it before, just type in gap snake, click on it. You'll see here, it will pop up here in your indicator list. One thing I would mention is maybe go down to 0.1 for the gap factor if you want to find all the small gaps, and sometimes that won't even show up. So notice this small gap here won't show up. So if we go to 0.05, it may show up, or maybe, I guess I can only do 0.1. So the gap snake will find that gap above. 0.1. Let's try that one more time. 0.05. Yeah, no. The lowest you can go is 0.1. So all in all, upside 1380 with that gap above. Downside, we'll call it 1085 on the downside for that gap below. Main thing to keep an eye on is just if we're going to hold this February low VWAP. And if we do break down through there, definitely more of a bear case to be seen. That is it for the weekend video. For those that celebrate the holiday this weekend, hope everyone has a nice Easter. For those that don't, hope you have a great weekend. Remember, we do have the 35% off sale going on until Sunday at midnight, so definitely check it out. We do have the 7-day free trial, so if you sign up for a 7-day free trial, let's say on Saturday, and the sale ends on Sunday, as long as you signed up for that 7-day free trial while the 35% sale is going on, you'll be able to lock in that discount once your free trial is done. So once again, everybody have a great weekend. Thank you for watching this weekend video update. Hopefully it was helpful to get another perspective in the markets going into the week ahead, and we'll see you next time.